I'm telling you to leave. You woman who can only give birth to girls. The one glaring at me with utter contempt was my husband, Jake. I instinctively rubbed my belly. I had borne 3 daughters through this belly, in pain, for Jake. But what Jake really wanted was a son. I still remember how after giving birth to our eldest and then our second daughter, he said, "Next time it will be a boy." When our third daughter was born, Jake even left the naming all up to me. Ah, is this finally heading to divorce? I felt like sighing. With a faint smile, my husband assured me not to worry about a successor. There's already someone else who can bear him a son. I'm Susan, a full-time homemaker. And I just turned 40. I live with my husband, Jake, and our 3 daughters. It's been 3 years since I gave birth to our third daughter. This month, I've decided to quit being a homemaker to go to work. It's because, on Jake's salary alone, we couldn't afford to provide lessons for our 2 older daughters. I decided to work for the sake of our 3 children. Fortunately, I found a job quickly, and now I'm managing to cover our household expenses while working. Lately, Jake's been griping more and more about how his folks are getting on in years, and that I should be the one to take care of them. Would be a big help if you could quit your job to look after my parents, Susan. That's out of the question right now. Why? We can live comfortably enough on just my salary if we don't splurge. Splurge? I've never done that. I'm working because your paycheck alone won't cover extracurriculars for the kids. They don't need any extracurriculars. It's perfectly fine if they don't learn anything extra. This is the kind of nagging I always get from Jake. That's why I've learned to just brush it off whenever he brings it up. Are you even listening, Susan? I hear you. I'll do what I can to help out. Honestly, I can't stand my in-laws. I genuinely don't want to help with their care. But Jake and I live near his parents' place. It was his idea to start our married life in an apartment close to them. At the time, I didn't know their true colors and thought it'd be convenient for me, too, saying naively that it would be helpful. But it didn't take long to see their true nature. About 6 months into our marriage, my mother-in-law asked me to help clear space for a big table she bought so we could all gather anytime. That's when I started helping out at their house. I found myself constantly bossed around by my in-laws, being told where to put things, to tidy up, to serve tea, like some kind of servant. Being newly married, I couldn't handle it well and just kept helping as they told me to. Because of that, each time I visited their house, they treated me worse and worse. Every visit, I was like a little maid, having to listen to the in-laws boast about the old days or complain about their struggles for what felt like hours. And then, they'd end up meddling in our private life, pressing us to quickly produce a male heir. Even my husband, who said he wanted kids, would say things like, "Of course, I'd prefer a boy. Actually, if it's not a boy, there's no point in having one." When I was pregnant, all that those 3 cared about was the baby's gender. When they found out our first child was a girl, they insulted me and said things like, "Well, there's a saying, first a girl, then a boy. She'll be handy to have around." When the second and third turned out to be girls too, the in-laws openly lost interest in them. They'd just keep saying, "Next time, make sure it's a boy." Why is this house such a mess? There's no rowdy boys running around, and still, you use being busy as an excuse. Can't you even clean properly? Maybe it's your laziness, that's why you can't have a boy. All these girls and all they'll do is get married off elsewhere. They can't be successors. You should be taking care of us, the heads of the family, instead of wasting time on girls who are no use as heirs. To think these are their own grandkids they're talking about. I never invited them in the first place, and I sure as heck don't want to go to their place. Being dragged to their house and treated like this is more than I can stand. I've told Jake countless times that I want to keep our distance from his parents, but it's like talking to a wall. The house being a mess is a fact. Girls are supposed to play quietly and read books, right? Instead, they just scatter their stuff everywhere. If you can't manage housework and childcare, which are supposed to be a woman's job, then it's no wonder you're being criticized. How can you say that when we're both working to raise our 2 kids? It's impossible for housework and childcare to be only my responsibility. If working is your excuse, then just quit and be a stay-at-home mom. If you can't do that, then what my mother's saying is right. You think you can support me and our 3 daughters on your salary alone? That's why I'm working, too. It gives me a headache just thinking about it. Sure, there was a time when men worked and women took care of the home and kids. But those days are long gone. Now it's normal for wives to work, too. But to accept the changing times while still insisting that housework and childcare are solely a wife's responsibilities is just too convenient. No matter how much I try to convince him, Jake just won't change. Mom's right. It must be as Dad says. Every time I heard these words, thoughts of divorce crossed my mind. But my daughters, oblivious to everything, were fond of Jake. Only the eldest, a middle schooler, seemed to have some reservations about Jake. Being in the throes of adolescence, she didn't seem to be very interactive with Jake. Yet, whenever I saw the third girl innocently laughing and clamoring to be held by Jake, calling him Daddy, Daddy, I couldn't bring myself to go through with a divorce. 3 months had passed since then. For some reason, Jake started coming home late more frequently. I was suspicious and asked him when he returned home. Jake, you've been quite late recently. Is something up at work? No, it just happened today. A junior messed up, and I had to cover some overtime. Don't worry about it. At first, I believed his words, but he began to come home late more often, and I asked again. Then Jake started making excuses like he was held up at work entertaining clients, or meetings with partners ran long. Even as I started to suspect Jake's words and actions, I couldn't muster the courage to take that step away because I didn't want to deprive my children of their beloved father. I started to pretend not to care about Jake's late returns. Half a year had gone by in this way. A colleague I worked with mentioned seeing Jake walking in the downtown area with a young woman. I dismissed it to her, saying Jake was at work, but she insisted she wasn't mistaken. Our families are close, often going camping or having barbecues together on holidays, and my daughters are around the same age as hers. Jake and she always got along well whenever they met. So I knew she couldn't have mistaken someone else for Jake. But even knowing this, my desire to trust Jake was stronger, and her suggestion to approach him next time made my heart skip a beat. I told her I'd talk to Jake about it, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. I went to see a private investigator immediately after work and requested a surveillance operation. 5 days later, the investigator got back to me, saying it had been quite straightforward. When I met the investigator after work, I was presented with substantial evidence. There were several photos of Jake entering a hotel with another woman, and the results were incriminating. I decided to confront Jake about the affair as soon as I got home. Though he had gotten home before me, he was just looking at his phone in the living room. I saw my eldest daughter take her younger sisters to her room. And while I felt sorry, I couldn't keep it to myself. Jake, can you explain this to me? You said you were working overtime or entertaining, but is entertaining clients at a hotel part of the job? Jake didn't respond to my words and just started making a phone call with a cold expression. For some reason, Jake remained silent, determined not to speak. So your silence means you admit it's true? It's none of your business. You really think a husband's affair is none of his wife's business? It's none of your business. No matter how many times I asked, Jake only repeated that it was none of my business. Then, suddenly, the doorbell rang. While I was thinking of pretending we weren't home, Jake quickly went to open the door. In came my in-laws and the woman from the investigator's photos. What's going on? Did you call them here? I hadn't planned on telling the truth until everyone arrived. Well, now that everyone's here, explain these photos. I challenged Jake again with the photos. The girl there is pregnant with a boy. Our family has always needed a son to carry on the family line. I told you before we got married that we needed a son. But you kept having girls. So, you're no longer needed and should leave right away. Just when I thought Jake was starting to make sense, he handed me a divorce paper with an explanation that didn't make any sense.
Hold on, pregnant? How many affairs do you need to have for that to happen? Sure, I knew about the son issue, but we can't choose the gender of our babies. Besides, you always seem to love our daughters.
Susan, you've heard the story, but you're someone who could only have girls. Just leave this house quietly.
I'm sorry, but I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to my husband, Jake. What's going on?
As I pressed Jake for answers, my in-laws interjected.
That's enough. We're finally having the boy we always wanted. It's best for you, who couldn't do anything, to leave. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to you, Jake. So why do both of you come barging in? Don't try to change the subject.
At my words, my husband lets out a heavy sigh. Enough already. There's no need to discuss this. All Susan has to do is leave this house quietly.
What are you saying? We have 3 daughters. And you know as well as I do that it's impossible for me to support all 3 with my current income, right, Jake?
That's none of my business. You're the one who wanted to have 3 girls. Just get out already.
Don't be ridiculous. What do you mean, wanted? You used to dote on all 3 of them too, didn't you, Jake? Why would you say something like this all of a sudden?
I thought my husband would say something in response to my words, but it was his mistress who retorted. Oh, this is why dealing with an older woman is such a hassle. When you're told to leave, you should just leave gracefully.
What are you even doing here? It's because of you showing up that our family is in this mess.
Mess? Don't you mean it's your fault for not being able to have a boy? The mistress sneers at me with a snort. I painfully realize that I've expected too much from my husband. We have 3 kids, and our youngest adores her dad, so I wanted to believe that divorce isn't the only right answer. I thought he would think of the children when faced with the evidence. Even if he didn't have a change of heart and we couldn't be a happy family, I believed he would at least act the part of a good father in front of the kids. But in reality, he shamelessly brings home not just his parents but even his mistress.
I understand. I'll file for divorce.
I was too naive. That's what I realize as I stand up to pack my things. I had thoughts about the mistress, smirking as she watched, but I didn't care anymore. I snatched the divorce papers from my husband and signed them. I write my name as the guardian for our daughters.
I'm taking custody of all 3 girls. I'll be filing for alimony and child support later. I'm leaving now, but I'll come back for the things I can't take with me today.
Do whatever you want. My in-laws, who usually make snide remarks, listened to our conversation with dissatisfied expressions. It seems they've left this discussion up to my husband. Knowing this, my husband confidently tells me off. Feeling the tense atmosphere, I hug my eldest daughter, who has been cautiously observing from the room. Maybe she understood just from that because she immediately started packing her things. The middle and youngest daughters, thinking they are going on an outing, cheerfully prepare their to-go bags. Even as we gather our bare essentials and head for the front door, no one comes out from the living room. The middle and youngest daughters look puzzled, but when they wave goodbye cheerfully, they leave the house in high spirits. I call my parents' house. I haven't been home much since I moved far away after getting married. Despite the sudden call, my mother tells me to come back as soon as I can. They offer to pick us up, so we decide to stay in a hotel for the night. There, without telling my daughters about their father's affair, I explain, Daddy and Mommy are just heading down different paths now. The younger 2, who love idols, recall a recently disbanded group who had said the same thing. Does that mean we can't be together anymore? It seems my eldest understands what I'm saying. I return to my parents' home with my daughters, and we are swamped with changing our family registry and various other legal and administrative processes. And before I know it, 2 months have passed, and I successfully received alimony and child support from my husband and his mistress. I had filed for compensation for the affair against both, and additionally for child support from my husband. Not wanting to see their faces ever again, I conducted everything through a lawyer. It cost money, but it was worth it to avoid the stress. The lawyer's visit to my in-laws to discuss alimony and child support was met with their silent bitterness, like they were swallowing a bitter pill. Nevertheless, my husband had an affair and even got another woman pregnant, which looks bad to outsiders. To prevent more complications, both my husband and my in-laws hastily gathered the funds for payment. It seems they even covered the mistress's portion of the alimony. Another 3 months go by. While we can't afford luxuries, my parents have supported us, and the 6 of us have been able to start living a peaceful life together. I was just beginning to get used to life without my husband, as were our daughters. On his day off, my husband suddenly called me. When I ignored him, the phone kept ringing over and over. I thought it would be trouble if it kept ringing until our daughters returned from their lessons, so I reluctantly decided to answer my husband's call. "Good, you finally picked up. What do you want all of a sudden?" "Well, you see, the woman I cheated with just gave birth." "What am I supposed to say to that?" I was about to hang up coldly when my husband suddenly raised his voice.
"The legs! I mean the crotch!"
According to my husband, the child that his mistress had given birth to was a girl. Moreover, it wasn't a case of a mix-up during the ultrasound. The doctors had been saying it was a girl from the start. The mistress had lied about the baby's sex because she wanted to marry my husband, who apparently would have considered divorce if it weren't a boy, but his parents put a stop to that. They were worried about not having any grandchildren if things continued as they were, so my husband called off the divorce. He was supposed to be thinking about having another child right away, but his life was in shambles, and he couldn't focus on that. Right after the birth, she couldn't work and had no income. She'd refused to do housework perfectly because of child-rearing, and she flatly denied doing any caregiving for my in-laws. Of course, if you're living with a baby who may or may not have a steady head yet, it's going to be like that. It's tough to take care of household chores perfectly when you're desperate with a baby, and you don't have the physical strength or spare energy to take care of elderly parents. Yet, living with this new wife, my husband now told me he was thinking of divorce again. "So? What do you want me to do about it?" I responded coldly, and my husband said, "Susan, please, can't we start over?" "Huh? As if I have any intention of getting back together with you now." I lashed out at him.
"Don't talk like that. Despite having thorns like a rose, you're delicate and bloom beautifully, aren't you? I love that about you, Susan. Let's give it another try."
My husband was trying to hold me back with his poetic words. Those words gave me chills.
"Susan, are you listening? We've been together for a long time. Your feelings haven't changed just because we've been apart for a bit, have they?"
Perhaps I would have been moved by my husband's words of love if this were back when we were married, but after discovering his affair and getting a divorce, all I could feel was coldness. I just gave a bitter smile. "You're smiling, so that means you forgive me, right?" My husband happily misunderstood. "Huh? You're totally clueless." That was a bitter smile. "I'm not laughing, and I haven't forgiven you."
"Why do you have to say that? Susan, please consider getting back together. Haven't we always been doing well? You were happy with me, weren't you?"
"We were not doing well, that's why we fought so many times. I wasn't happy, that's why I divorced you. It was you who said you didn't need me."
"That's true, right? Then we can start over. It was me who suggested we break up, so I'm suggesting we start over. Let's do it."
My husband started spouting nonsense about wanting to reconcile. He even brought up old times, and honestly, I was fed up. But then, a thought struck me, and I changed the subject. "Oh, about Kate."
"Why do you know her name? She didn't introduce herself that time, did she?"
My husband sounded surprised when I mentioned the name of my remarriage partner. "Of course, I know. I heard it from the detective, and I even sent a certified mail for the alimony claim. And about her."
"What about Kate?"
"I was just wondering who she might be targeting next. She has a hobby of breaking up seemingly happy couples or married people,
and since you and I are divorced, I was wondering who the next target is.
My husband said nothing. Perhaps he was speechless, mouth agape. I proceeded to explain to my unresponsive husband what I knew about this woman named Kate. Kate had always been adorable since she was a child, always surrounded by various people. Her father, the company president, doted on her, and she was spoiled, always getting what she wanted. It's precisely because she could get anything she wanted that taking things from others became her hobby. As an adult, her targets became other people's boyfriends, fiancés, and husbands. Since taking things was her hobby, she would easily discard them once she managed to start a relationship. When I introduced her dating history, investigated by a detective, to Jake, he gasped in a strangled voice.
What the heck? Why bring this up now? If you told me this when we were getting divorced, I wouldn't be in this mess. Back then, all you said was get out. You never listened to my side of the story. So, I did as I was told and left. It's not like a woman who approaches a married man can be considered good-hearted.
Don't talk like that. Susan, it's so sneaky of you, making it sound like it's my fault. If you had just explained things properly back then, it would have been different. Jake, for some reason, started to speak in a defeated tone, playing the victim when he spoke to me. Angered by his words, I snapped at him.
What are you on about? You're the one in the wrong, not like, you are wrong. Why don't you just live however you want? I don't care anymore.
At my words, Jake suddenly spoke in a softer tone.
Susan, it's going to be tough raising 3 daughters all by yourself. Let me take at least one of them. If you let me take one, you'll have an easier time. Aren't 2 kids enough?
The cloying sweetness in his voice was so vile, it made my head spin. What in the world does he think of our daughters? I could never send them to live with such a man. Neither Jake nor his parents really want the girls because they love them. He kept saying any girl would do, or just one, talking about them as if they weren't people. I could only see a future where they would be preyed upon by Jake and his parents. I knew that as they grew up, they would receive the same terrible treatment I did. That's why I refused adamantly.
Don't be ridiculous. I will raise my daughters properly. Don't be like that. A child needs her father, don't you think?
Jake argued defiantly.
A father who can't even raise his kids properly, let alone cheats, has no right to custody.
I spoke firmly, to leave no room for misunderstanding.
Even so, it's up to the girls to decide if they want a father like that. They're too young to decide for themselves now, so I'll take responsibility and raise them.
Enraged, I conveyed my feelings and hung up the phone on Jake. I don't know if it was because I immediately blocked his number, but I never heard from him again. Months went by. It seems Jake and Kate's divorce went through without a hitch. Kate went back home with her newborn child. Apparently, the child's father is also married, and she is being sued for alimony not just by Jake but also by his actual wife. Strapped for cash, she seems to be working hard at raising her child with the support of her parents back home. Terrifyingly, she shows no signs of remorse. She is aware that what she's doing is wrong, and if caught, she pays alimony as a sign of her sincerity. However, it seems that the money is also being provided by her father, who is a company president, allowing her to live a carefree life. It appears that the reason Kate went after my husband was just a whim. With her natural beauty and status, she would freely take other women's boyfriends and married men, and she decided to target married men as her next conquest. It just so happened that Kate set her sights on Jake and me when she saw us in town. It was a complete nuisance to have our lives disrupted by her caprice. And the reason Kate decided to marry Jake, something she usually didn't bother with after taking a man, was because Jake was indecisive and indulgent towards her. It seems Kate wanted a man who would treat her like a princess, indulging her every whim and buying her whatever she desired. Now, I couldn't care less about it all. I was stunned by the sheer audacity of not just my easily swayed husband but also Kate, the woman he cheated with. My husband Jake was deceived by his affair partner, but he had the chance to refuse and didn't take the bait. No matter what stories I hear, the fact that Jake betrayed me won't just disappear. I also heard that Jake's family was ostracized by friends and relatives and had moved far away. They only stormed into my house once after the move. Susan, stop being stubborn and hand over one of the kids.
That's right, Susan. It's not good for a child to receive all the love from just one parent. We'll raise her together, the three of us.
Please stop.
I'm fine raising her on my own.
Thinking that my youngest daughter, who was still too young to understand, would be okay, the three of them came with a menacing look to take her away, and I resisted desperately.
You can't handle it, Susan. You can't raise her while working.
Hand her over, Susan. Poor thing. Don't worry. We'll raise her properly. No matter what I said, they wouldn't listen.
Stop! Don't take her! This is kidnapping!
My youngest daughter cried loudly, and I screamed just as loudly. Thanks to our cries, the nearby residents gathered and quickly restrained the three of them. After a while, the police arrived from a call and took the three away. I repeatedly thanked my neighbors, relieved that my daughter was safe. Later, the three of them received a restraining order. But I'm considering moving. Because a restraining order isn't enough to make me feel safe. Since they know where we live, it wouldn't be strange for them to show up at any time. I've discussed moving with my parents, who live with us, because I feel sorry for them too. They said they'd dispose of the house and move with us, as it would be a nuisance to be followed forever. Still, I feel guilty for changing my daughter's environment so often. Yet, seeing their smiling faces and healthy growth heals me. I've decided to move to a new place to protect them. Just before moving, I got a call from an unregistered number. Thinking it was the moving company or someone from the city office, I answered, only to find it was surprisingly Kate. Summing up her sobbing story, she had apparently gotten into trouble for being with too many men and had contracted a serious disease. I need money for treatment, so give me back the alimony, she cried, but I responded coldly.
Don't you have a wonderful dad who buys you everything? There's nothing I need to do for you.
Her audacity was too much, and without much of a response, I just hung up. I immediately blocked her and bought a new cell phone, so now she can't reach me anymore. I'm grateful to my parents for coming with me, and I'm determined to keep working hard for my daughter's healthy upbringing.
It wasn't necessarily you from the start. What? You think just because we're married, you're loved?
I never imagined my husband would cheat on me and then have the audacity to say such a thing. Overwhelmed with shock, I called my mother, only to receive an unexpected response.
Well, isn't that a good thing?
Huh? At that moment, I had no clue what she thought was good, but it seemed my mother had her own thoughts on the matter. It was time to bring justice to a husband who showed no remorse for cheating and to a sister who stole another's spouse. My name is Sarah Taylor. I'm currently 35 and work as a pharmacist at a general hospital. Since graduating from college, I've been dedicated to my job, living a life far from leisure or romance. My days were simple, devoid of any drama, until one day, when I received a message from a club member I was briefly affiliated with in college. It seems there was a man he wanted to introduce me to. I learned that this man worked in an all-male environment and had zero opportunities to meet women. They asked if they could share my contact information. Initially puzzled, I figured it'd be rude to decline without reason. After agreeing to share my contact information, the man reached out to me immediately.
Hello, I'm David Taylor. Sorry for the sudden approach, but I've heard you're a wonderful lady, so I wanted to chat.
I hope you don't mind me sharing your contact info. Our conversations via email and phone were lively, and soon, David and I started dating. My first impression of David was of a man who took charge. He was meticulous in planning our dates and always put ladies first. It felt as if I was being treated like a princess, and my daily life seemed to be colored full of roses. I promise to make you happy. Please be with me. Let's get married.
Yes, I'd love to.
So, I got married at 33, but since our wedding, I began to notice David changing. Having lived alone for a long time, David had established his own routines. Of course, I had my own habits from living solo, but as a couple, I tried to make adjustments to ensure we both lived harmoniously. Often hearing David complain about his tiring work, I took it upon myself to handle chores like cooking, cleaning, and laundry. However, this might have backfired. Before I knew it, David seemed to have adopted the mindset that household chores aren't his job.
I was gonna take a bath, but what's this? There's trash in the drain.
I'm sorry, I'm cooking right now and can't step away. Would you mind cleaning it up?
What? Why do I have to clean right after coming home from work?
With a click of his tongue, David began preparing to go out somewhere. Hey, what's up? Dinner will be ready soon.
Why are you ordering me around?
It's really off-putting. Ordering you? I didn't. Besides, where are you going this late?
Anywhere I want. You gonna boss me around?
He slammed the door and seemed to have left. Sometimes I might be lacking in household chores, or if I ask for small favors, he becomes grumpy right away. He acts like a rebellious teenager. He wasn't like this before we got married. With these thoughts, I've been spending more time alone. Lately, I've been holding back from saying unnecessary things to David. I don't say much, don't ask for anything, and keep my reactions neutral. I've been wondering if this is what married life is supposed to be like. Around that time, I've noticed David coming home particularly late. Maybe he's been busy at work, working weekends and unexpected late shifts. I hope he doesn't get sick. You've been coming home late recently. Busy at work?
You trying to boss me around again? That's so annoying.
It's work, okay, work. He responded in an irritated manner, and we stopped talking after that, but I know. One of my acquaintances is a junior coworker of David, and she told me some concerning things. She mentioned David reducing his overtime for family time and that she's seen him arm in arm with someone, disappearing into the night multiple times. I don't remember ever walking arm in arm with David, but something does come to mind. I have a twin sister, and even as adults, people sometimes mistake us. Our faces look identical, but my sister, who's vibrant with makeup and always dresses elegantly, is quite charming. If anyone mistook someone for me, it'd probably be her.
Hey David, my friend said she saw you last Wednesday night around 7 p.m.
Oh?
Really? Around 7 p.m.?
What were you doing then?
I don't remember, maybe I was at the convenience store?
As he said this, not taking his eyes off his phone, I noticed his fingers trembling. I decided to be direct.
She said you were walking arm in arm with me.
But I was working late that day.
What are you trying to say?
Spit it out. Have you been seeing my sister, Scarlett, behind my back?
So what's your point?
When I confronted David about cheating, he started saying things he never expected. Suddenly, he stood up from the sofa and glared at me.
You know, it wasn't necessarily about you in the first place.
What?
You think just 'cause we're married means you're loved?
What?
I mean, when we were dating, didn't we get married because we loved each other?
No way.
Someone plain like you don't exactly stand out when you're beside me.
Don't stand out? Huh? So, you think it's okay to cheat with my sister? While fiddling with his smartphone, David replied with a sigh.
Look, I want to become an influencer someday, and looking good on camera matters, right? If I were to choose someone, it'd be Scarlett.
What? Influencer? What are you talking about?
Besides, you're a pharmacist, so even if I mess up, we won't have any financial issues.
The unexpected comments kept coming, and I was having a hard time processing everything.
So, are you saying our marriage is just a safety net? Kinda feels that way, doesn't it?
So, you didn't marry me because you loved me?
Don't flatter yourself too much. Who do you think would fall for a plain Jane like you?
David gave a mocking smile, looking right at me.
I've always thought this, but you don't really make an effort with your makeup or clothes. You just don't care, do you?
Listening to this nonsense, I raised my voice.
Then why don't you divorce me and marry Scarlett? You don't even understand how I feel.
I don't care. I'm just with you because I want to achieve my dreams and have a good life. You should be thankful.
What? How can you expect me to be grateful in this situation?
David, with a smug look on his face, waved his hand dismissively and then returned his gaze to his smartphone.
If I hadn't confessed to you, you'd probably still be single, right? Just stop making fun of me. I want a divorce right now. No way. I ain't gonna divorce you. Plus, I don't know what our company and your parents would say. And of course, don't tell anyone about this.
I was shaking with anger.
After everything, you have the audacity to tell me not to speak out? Well, I doubt anyone would believe you anyway.
My mind went blank with shock. I was all mixed up and couldn't think straight, but suddenly decided to call my mother, even though it was early in the morning. When I got married, she heard David's greetings and knew him well enough. I thought she would understand me with a brief talking. "What's up calling so early? And are you crying?" "No, not really." "Just spill it, what happened?" Prompted by my mother, I explained everything that had happened. After listening to the story about David and Scarlett, she exclaimed loudly.
"Well, that's good, isn't it?"
"Huh?" I was puzzled, not understanding what she found good about the situation.
"Just lay off for now and leave David be for a bit."
But just leaving him be. You chip away at these situations bit by bit. Taking my mother's advice, I decided to let David stew for a while. A few nights later, I met my mother at a cafe. "Is it okay for you to be out this late? Isn't Scarlett at home?" Scarlett said she's on a date. She mentioned something about a new boyfriend recently, but after hearing about Sarah, it made sense. "So she's been telling you she's going on dates when she heads out?" "Yeah, typical Scarlett stuff. I've felt since high school that she's been a bit loose with her relationships, but I never thought it'd lead to this." My mother sighed, drinking her iced tea left in the glass at once. "We need to keep a close eye on those two." She started fiddling with her smartphone, but after a while, she looked up with a mischievous grin. "Next time, bring David over to our place. I've already texted him." She showed me the text message on her phone. It mentioned needing help with shopping and the need for some muscle as she was planning to buy something heavy. Guys like him act all nice in public. Just ask for some help and you'll see his true colors. I see. On the agreed day, I headed to my parents' house with David. On the way to my parents' house, it seemed like David suddenly remembered something and started speaking. "Hey, I think you know this, but if you tell your parents about that incident, I won't let it slide. Even if you do, they probably won't believe it anyway. You've got to be kidding. Why on earth would I say that? What's in it for me?" While discussing this, they arrived at my parents' house. "David, it's been a while. I'm sorry for bothering you on your day off. It really helps that you came."
"No worries, I just wanted to be of assistance to you."
My mother greeted David with a bright smile. Suddenly, as if she remembered something, she made a suggestion. "Oh right, Scarlett got the day off from work too. She mentioned wanting to go shopping together. Would that be okay with you, David?"
"Of course. Well, shall we head to the mall?"
The shopping center was about a 30-minute drive from my parents' house. "Before we shop, there's a place I'd like to go." Without hesitation, my mother briskly moved through the mall. We ended up at a jewelry shop hosting a special Valentine's Day corner. There was a flyer about a special gift for couples who wrote their wishes for love, and a chance to win a grand prize through a lottery. I often see campaigns giving candies to kids who write their wishes, but I didn't know they have ones for adults too. It says couples and married folks can participate.
Why not give it a shot, Sarah and David? You might get lucky.
Seeing that poster, David began to back away hesitantly. "Well, I'm not really into these seasonal promotions."
Valentine's is all about love between couples. It's something couples and spouses should do together.
While emphasizing spouses, my mother chuckled mischievously. I always knew my mother wore her heart on her sleeve, and she was definitely up to something. Realizing this, I decided to play along.
Come on, let's give it a try. There's a lottery where 3 couples can win a luxury resort hotel stay. That resort hotel? You two never really had a proper wedding, so why not take some wedding photos there?
I'm not much for photos, and we might not even win.
We haven't won yet, but we might. Excuse me, ma'am.
Before David could decline again, I called over a store employee and expressed their interest in participating in the Valentine's event. However, the employee's face turned sour upon seeing them. The employee stated that they couldn't participate in the event.
Huh?
The flyer said couples and spouses can join. I'm sorry, but we don't allow second-time participants. Second time? This is our first time ever visiting this mall. Suddenly, I turned around and saw 2 people fidgeting. I couldn't believe it, and when I looked back at my mother, she was asking the store clerk something. What do all participants in this promotion receive as a gift?
It's this charm. It's a special design just for this year.
Saying this, the clerk brought out a shooting star design charm that looked familiar. It was the same charm I had glimpsed on David's bag. I remember spotting it casually when I was observing a pouch I didn't recognize he owned. Could this be the shooting star on David's pouch? Hearing this, my mother immediately sprang into action. That's odd. Scarlett had something similar recently. Excuse me for a sec. As my mother said this, she reached into Scarlett's bag and pulled out a wallet. Just as I thought, it's attached right here. I had a feeling.
Mom, stop it! Don't go through someone's wallet! You're not a thief!
David, who was watching the mother-daughter squabble, seemed even more nervous than before, bouncing his knee.
Look at him jittering. Maybe he's panicking because he's been caught on a date with someone else?
But David snapped back loudly at the front of the store.
What the hell? Just because of one accessory, you're gonna make a big deal out of it? This sucks.
I'm the one who's upset here. My mother smirked mischievously, putting a hand on David's shoulder. Let me get this straight, David. You left your wife, Sarah, to have a date as a couple with her twin sister, Scarlett?
No, you've got it all wrong, my mother-in-law. I just got this charm from someone nearby when we went to the bar. They said it was a charm for a happy marriage. Don't even try to lie like that at this moment. It's obvious.
What I realized later was that these shooting star charms given away at the event had serial numbers engraved on them. The serial numbers matched, and this became the conclusive evidence that gave away to my mother.
We need to have a proper talk. If you have anything to say it at home.
When we got home and all 4 of us gathered in the living room, the atmosphere became tense, like a wake. I didn't even know about such an event. Mom, where did you hear about it? I got a tip from a colleague at work. Apparently, it's become a sort of power spot among those who cheat. They say if you can keep those matching items without getting caught, you're destined to be together. While discussing this, my mother addressed David and Scarlett. So, are you gonna explain in detail?
David, you're married to Sarah but cheating on her.
Besides, you're cheating with Sarah's twin sister, Scarlett. Is that right?
Well, yeah, something like that.
I can't believe he's laughing it up at a time like this.
But they're sisters, so I'm still your precious family, right? I mean, they're from the same family, so why bring up such an unpleasant topic?
You hurt your wife and prayed at that place.
Does that mean you're serious about it? Well, something like that. Scarlett is so feminine and lovely, she knows how to step back and let a man lead.
Suddenly, David became talkative and began to spill the beans on why he cheated.
For me, I was thinking I wanted to be with Scarlett from now on.
Really? My mother just listened quietly to David's outrageous story without uttering a word. I couldn't bear just sitting and listening any longer when suddenly, Scarlett leaned in closer.
We are serious. I mean, Sarah got married first, but he truly loves me. He always tells me that.
If you're that serious, then why not just get a divorce or remarry or whatever you want right now? David, taking my mother's words as a sign of permission, started to get carried away.
So, I appreciate your understanding in the long run, my mother-in-law. And Sarah, I'm gonna remarry Scarlett, so this is it between me and you.
It's not over yet. There are things that need to be settled, right? David seemed taken aback by my mother's words for a moment, but quickly resumed his smug grin.
You're saying not to end it, but didn't you just forgive me for divorcing Sarah and being with Scarlett?
But still.
It's true I've borrowed money from Sarah within a certain range. But since I'm still part of the family after the divorce, don't you think returning it would be just silly and crass?
Immediately after hearing David's words, Mother turned to me and asked. That's a valid point, isn't it?
Hold on a second. I can't accept this, divorcing without debt repayment or an apology and then remarrying. I've talked to a lawyer, one of my acquaintances.
I showed them a loan book, which I had prepared just in case, following the advice of a lawyer.
You're gonna pay $40,000 to Sarah? She's earning her own money, isn't that enough? Do you want more? You such a greedy person.
As the two argued loudly, my mother made a proposal. You're starting a new life together, and you don't want to give a huge sum like $40,000 to Sarah, who can earn her own money, right?
That's right. Recovering debt from one's own family is a bad joke.
Divorce is not a happy occasion, but Scarlett getting married is something to celebrate. I'll cover David's debt up to $30,000 for Scarlett.
Mom, you're the best. I'm so happy.
But I have one condition. I want you to think about this. The document my mother presented read waiver of inheritance agreement. Inheritance waiver? So, if Scarlett agrees that, you'll take care of the debt for me, right?
I don't really get it, but this means Mom's gonna help us with our wedding funds, right? Then, we've gotta agree with that.
Facing the unbelievable notion of my mother paying my husband's debt, I felt like crying on the spot. There must be some hidden agenda my mother has. However, instead of helping me, who's been hurt by an affair and subsequent divorce, she's siding with my twin sister and cleaning up the mess. After ensuring that all the necessary procedures had been properly understood, my mother said we could end this matter. When we reconvened after our lawyer told us the application was accepted, my mother muttered as if talking to herself.
Now that Scarlett has renounced inheritance, it'll belong to Sarah, I guess.
Huh? Inheritance? Why bring it up now? Although David seemed utterly confused with countless questions floating in his head, Mother continued her soliloquy.
The commercial building downtown, the apartment in the next town, the convenience store beside it, and this house too. I can't wait to see how much they'll be worth in the future.
Hearing this, David and Scarlett abruptly stood up, causing a loud noise.
This is the first I've heard of this. You tricked us.
If that's the case, I can help manage the properties or something.
What are you blabbering about? You think I'd trust someone who can easily betray others and then act all innocent? Why didn't you tell us? We lived together for so long, and you never mentioned it.
It's from my uncle. He's been a landowner for a long time, but he doesn't have any children. So, there's no one to inherit it. That's why it came to me. What's it to you anyway?
Well, you could at least give us one of the apartments. Like a wedding gift, a love nest.
Save your dreams for bedtime. This is all written in the documents. Neither of you read it, did ya? Maybe you two are a match in some weird way. My mother chuckled and stored the documents in a nearby safe. In the end, the money that my mother paid could be seen as some sort of palimony. You have been a real pain. Always relying on me, saying it's easier to stay at home.
But living alone is scary, and strangers come around.
You bring it upon yourself. You're always getting into some kind of trouble and bringing it home. It's been a real hassle. According to my mother, Scarlett had been reckless with her relationships even before adulthood, causing constant trouble. At that time, I was focused solely on my studies and started living alone when I went to college. So, I wasn't very familiar with how my mother and Scarlett lived. But from what my mother said and how she said it, it was easy to imagine the difficulties. There was a time when 3 men claiming to have been duped by Scarlett stormed our home. And when she dated a married man, his wife came shouting at our doorstep. It's been hell. Isn't that the same as an affair? Just like what she's doing now. I thought she had finally settled down, and then I hear about an affair with Sarah's husband. After my divorce was finalized, David and Scarlett filed their marriage papers and became a couple. But what really kept them going was the thrill of their secret relationship. Ever since David divorced me and started living together with Scarlett, aspects of each other that they didn't want to see or know about began to emerge. Every time it appeared to be, the relationship between them were getting more sour. Furthermore, it became widely known at David's workplace that he had divorced due to an affair. He's been treated like a hot potato because rumors say he made a move on his wife's sister. A mutual friend who works at the same office as David told me that he's gonna be transferred to a sales office in Nebraska soon. Well, he's essentially been demoted, hasn't he? But you know how he is, he might not even realize why he's been demoted. True. That's quite possible. One day, I was having tea at a cafe with my mother while I was taking a half-day off to use up some paid leave. It's a local favorite and a nice spot to chat, but I didn't expect to run into the last person I wanted to see there. Sarah, I'm gonna be transferred. Oh, really? But you brought this on yourself, right?
It's a sales office that's a half-day away by train. Isn't our manager harsh? They won't even cover my moving expenses.
Well, that figures.
Why the heck not? It's a company order, they should at least cover the moving costs. I've been working hard for the company.
He seemed totally oblivious to the fact that he was being demoted because of his own actions. What's more, the nerve of him trying to squeeze relocation costs from the company.
Hey! Can you lend me some money for the moving expenses? Or I can take it as a promotion bonus or something.
You talk without realizing the absurdity of what you're saying. Besides, I don't need you anymore. Please get out of my sight. Ever since I divorced David, my days have been like a breath of fresh air. Recently, I thought about trying something new. A comic I casually posted on social media turned out to be a huge hit. I never thought a comic about my sister taking away my husband, mixed with some fiction, would be read by so many people. I feel blessed to be able to take on new challenges, encouraged by warm messages from fans. Maybe by sharing it in the form of a comic and having it read by many, some of my unpleasant memories are being processed. I hope to continue living fulfilling days, both in my work and with my comics. My wife will be gone by tomorrow. During our honeymoon, I woke up in the middle of the night to overhear my husband secretly having a terrifying conversation on the phone. Trembling with fear, I dared to peek into his smartphone to find out what he was talking about. What I found was beyond belief. Knowing of my husband's plan, I took his passport and flew back to the States on my own. As I was planning to utterly destroy him, someone suddenly approached me. My name is Karen. I'm just an ordinary office worker in New York. I met my husband, Brian, through mutual friends. We hit it off after a few dinners out, and after dating for a year, we just recently got married. Brian is handsome and has a really kind personality, but there was one major problem. This happened one day just before our wedding. I'm home. Normally, Brian gets home from work later than I do, but on this day, I had to work late, so I got home after him. As I walked in and was about to take off my shoes, I noticed something odd. Were these shoes always here? There were not only Brian's work shoes, but also a pair of women's heels. Could he be cheating? I thought. Listening carefully, I could hear muffled voices. It was a man and a woman talking, and I immediately recognized Brian's voice. I couldn't make out the entire conversation, but I could hear a woman's voice laughing along. In the spur of the moment, I started recording with my smartphone and burst into the living room.
Huh?
There was Brian and my mother-in-law.
Oh, welcome back. Karen, welcome home. Sorry for intruding.
Relieved that it wasn't an affair, the living room scene was still quite bizarre. Boxes were piled up everywhere. Confused, I asked, "What's with all these boxes?" Brian responded, "Oh, these? We're moving." My mom came over to help pack. I was so confused I felt like my brain might explode.
Moving? Where to? I never heard about this. Oh, Brian. You didn't tell Karen? Sorry, I've been so busy with work. I'm so sorry, Karen. I told him if you're gonna get married, you should move into our house. It looks like Brian didn't mention it to you.
Live in her house? I was more confused than ever. I was looking forward to starting our newlywed life together, just the two of us. This is a huge deal. I have to put a stop to this. So, I said, I haven't been told anything about this. I can't just agree to something decided without me. But then they said, it's normal for newlyweds to live with their in-laws, you know? If you can't, maybe you should reconsider the marriage. Mom's right. Plus, I'm used to my house. It'll be easier for you too if anything happens. Two birds with one stone, right? With my mother-in-law present, I couldn't argue with Brian, and it was decided that we'd move into his parents' home. Turns out, Brian is very much a mama's boy. In retrospect, had I been more assertive back then, maybe things wouldn't have turned out this way. Living with my in-laws was incredibly tough for me. Ever since we started living at my husband's parents' house, his mama's boy tendencies accelerated. The first person he'd ask for anything was always Mom. While my mother-in-law took care of most of the cooking and household chores, the rare times I made dinner he would say, "My mom's cooking tastes better." Perhaps my mother-in-law enjoyed being relied on by her son because she did everything for him. My father-in-law would just turn a blind eye to this behavior and not only ignored me but wouldn't even look at me. Sometimes, when I tried talking to him, he'd just brush me off. I constantly questioned my place in the household. The biggest concern for me was my mother-in-law's extravagant spending habits. After moving in, I realized she adored branded clothes and bags. Every time her favorite brands released something new, she'd buy it. Every release, she'd approach me saying, "Karen, I really want this, but I'm a bit short on cash right now. Could you maybe lend me a little?" Even though I thought she shouldn't buy it if she couldn't afford it, since she did all the cooking and cleaning, I couldn't object and just gave her the money as asked. Thanks to this, the savings I had accumulated since my college days were nearly gone. When I tried discussing this with my husband, he just said, "We're living here rent-free, so don't complain. It's not like I chose to live here." Still, the reason I didn't leave was that my husband, for all his faults, genuinely cared for me. Whenever we both had a day off, he'd take me out on dates and he had even planned our honeymoon. Living with the in-laws was tough, but I kept going, holding on to the hope in his kindness. Finally, the day of our honeymoon that my husband planned arrived. Our destination was Italy. It was a dream come true for me as I always wanted to try authentic Italian cuisine. The thought of traveling abroad with the love of my life made me so excited. However, my excitement for the honeymoon turned into a nightmare due to one thing my husband said. It happened late at night. I woke up wanting to go to the bathroom and noticed my husband wasn't next to me. Assuming he was also in the restroom, I approached and heard him speaking on the phone. Who could he be talking to at this hour? Listening closer, I heard some shocking words.
"My wife's gonna be gone tomorrow."
What?
"Don't worry, Mom. I've got it all planned. I'll get back to you."
It seemed he was talking to my mother-in-law. But what did he mean by "gonna be gone"? Fearful, I quickly returned to bed and pretended to be asleep. After a while, my husband came back to bed and soon began snoring. Making sure he was asleep, I stealthily took his smartphone and headed to the bathroom. Luckily, he didn't have a password on it. As wrong as it felt, given the circumstances, I had to look. Opening his messages, I found a terrifying plan detailed in the chats with his mother. They were scheming to take my life for the insurance money, which my mother-in-law intended to spend on branded items. The fear was overwhelming. I couldn't believe that my husband, who had always been kind to me, was plotting this with his mother. I took photos of their conversation with my own phone and returned to bed. The rest of the night, I was too frightened to sleep. As dawn broke and transport services started operating, I realized I needed to leave for my safety. Gathering only my belongings, I decided to leave the hotel on my own. Just as I was about to leave, I spotted my husband's passport on the desk.
A good idea just hit me.
I took my husband Brian's passport and left the room, in an attempt to strand him abroad. I then headed to the airport, boarded the plane, and returned to New York ahead of him. Throughout that time, Brian kept calling me relentlessly, but I ignored all his calls. Once back in New York, I began preparing to take revenge on my husband and his mother. Since I was living with his parents, I couldn't return home. So, I based myself in a relatively cheap hotel in the city, gathering more evidence and contacting lawyers. I also made occasional visits to our house when his parents were out, sneaking out some of my belongings bit by bit. Brian continued to reach out, but I kept ignoring him. A few days of such life passed, and I was at his parents' house fetching my belongings. His mother, Karen, was at her knitting class, and his father was out golfing. I figured they wouldn't be back for at least 2 hours. As I was packing, I suddenly heard, "Huh? Karen?" I turned around to find my father-in-law standing there. This wasn't good. Brian and I were supposed to be on our honeymoon in Italy until today.
What are you doing here? Weren't you two supposed to be on your honeymoon?
What should I do? What excuse could I possibly give? Should I be honest about why I returned to New York alone? But what if my father-in-law was in on whatever scheme Brian was planning? These thoughts raced in my mind. Seeing my confusion, he said, "It might be better to talk over a coffee. How about we go to a nearby diner?" Not wanting to be there when my mother-in-law returns, I agreed to his suggestion. Once we sat at the diner, he quickly asked, "So, why are you here when you should be abroad? What happened to Brian?" I was hesitant to tell the truth. If he was in on the plan with her and Brian, everything I had worked on would be ruined. "Didn't your wife tell you anything?" I asked, trying to gauge his knowledge. Looking puzzled, he responded, "I haven't heard a thing." His reaction suggested that he genuinely didn't know anything. Believing him, I decided to lay out everything to him.
"Are you aware of this plan?"
I then showed him the printed messages exchanged between Brian and my mother-in-law. His face was one of sheer shock.
"No way! I've seen them whispering together a few times, but I never thought they were plotting something like this."
It seemed like my father-in-law really didn't know.
"Yes, when I was over there, I overheard my husband talking on the phone with his mom, and that's when I found out. I got scared, so I returned to the US on my own earlier." "I'm so sorry. My wife really owes you an apology."
"Please don't apologize.
You haven't done anything wrong. As for the future, I feel terrible asking this of you, but I'm thinking of divorcing Brian."
That's completely up to you, Karen. I'm truly sorry, especially since this should have been a happy time as newlyweds. He apologized to me many times. I used to think he was avoiding me, maybe even disliked me, but he spoke to me with such kindness and concern. Despite him being such a good man, I can't fathom how his wife and my husband turned out the way they did. While I was thinking about this, he shared a story with me. "Karen, you've been forced to buy branded items for my wife, haven't you?"
"Well, yeah, I have."
"You know, it might have been my fault."
"Excuse me?"
"Well, it was shortly after my wife and I got married. I gifted her a designer handbag for her birthday. After that, she became totally obsessed with designer brands. Even at this age, she keeps wearing those expensive brands. I kinda wish she'd dress more age-appropriately."
"I see.
There were times when she'd even go into debt just to buy them. I was pretty mad at her then. I never imagined she'd ask you to buy stuff for her now. I'm really sorry about that." I had no idea that my mother-in-law's obsession with brands had such a backstory. Still, I couldn't forgive her for what she'd done.
"It's not your fault. She continued her habits even after you got mad at her. She's the one to blame." Right. By the way, how's Brian doing? He was supposed to be back by now, wasn't he? About that.
Oh no. I wondered how he'd react knowing that his son was stuck overseas. But I had come this far, I had to tell him everything.
Actually, I took Brian's passport with me when I came back to the States. So, he won't be coming back for a while. What?
I'm sorry. I know it's wrong, but it was the only way to smoothly proceed with the divorce.
I see. Well, since you live with us, I guess it's understandable. So, that's what was going on. Did something happen? No, just remembered the day you returned to the US. I overheard Brian talking to my wife on the phone.
According to the father-in-law of Brian, for a moment, seemed panicked without me, but he later said that things would work out if I just disappeared. At the time, he had no idea what they were talking about, but now it made sense to him.
I understand the situation. If you're okay with it, I'll support you, Karen. Really? Thank you so much.
While we were talking, my phone suddenly rang. It was from Brian. Given the time, he probably realized his passport was missing. I finally answered the call.
Hello? Oh! Karen! Thank God you answered. Where the heck are you? I've been worried sick. But I'm just glad you're safe. I'm sorry for making you worry. I had an urgent call from my family back home and had to return. Things got so hectic that I couldn't get in touch. I get it. But hey, have you seen my passport? I was gonna return today, but I can't find it. About that, I accidentally took your passport with me when I rushed back. What? So what am I supposed to do? You should be able to get a replacement passport there. It'll probably be faster than me sending it to you. A replacement? What about my job? I can't take any more days off. Don't worry, I'll explain everything to your company. I'll also talk to your parents about it. All right then.
I'm sorry. So, that's what's going on. Please be careful when you come back. With that, I hung up the phone.
Karen, you sure can spin a tall tale, can't ya? I've always been crafty, that's for sure.
Thanks to my father-in-law supporting me, I was able to proceed with the divorce preparations more smoothly. And finally, the day arrived. Brian managed to get his passport reissued and returned to the States. His mom went to the airport to pick him up, so the two of them came back home together.
We're home. Man, what an ordeal. Indeed. All because of Karen.
After hearing from Brian that I'd returned to the States before him, his mother, apparently upset that their plan failed, started making sarcastic comments towards me. I wanted to snap back at her, but I held my tongue. No worries. They're gonna get what's coming to them soon. As soon as Brian and his mother entered the house, my father-in-law, with a stern look, said, "Both of you, come here." He led them to the living room where I was waiting.
Sit down.
Brian and his mother seemed a bit flustered, but they couldn't defy his imposing demeanor, so they sat down obediently.
I apologize for bringing this up as soon as you guys got back, but there's something really important we need to discuss. Important? I'll cut to the chase. Brian, I want a divorce. Divorce? Hold on, Karen. What's this all about? You trap my son in Italy and then demand a divorce when he comes back? There's a limit to being unreasonable. Unreasonable? Aren't you the unreasonable ones here? What do you mean? Oh, so you're playing dumb now? Can you explain this then?
Saying this, I showed them pictures of the messages exchanged between Brian and his mother.
What's this? These can be easily fabricated these days. This isn't valid proof. You're right. This might be weak as evidence. But what about this?
I then presented a voice recorder. Pressing the play button, the recording of a phone conversation between Brian and his mother played. My father-in-law had recorded it for me. Since his wife is hard of hearing, she always turns the speaker volume to the max during calls, making it audible throughout the house. My father-in-law took the opportunity to record them. The conversation revealed that since I had safely returned to the US, their scheme had failed. It also included the disappointed voice of my mother-in-law and my husband discussing their next move.
You can't deny this now, can you? Wait, Karen. Please reconsider the divorce. I only did what my mom told me to. I never wanted any of this. But she kept saying she needed more money to buy her favorite designer items. I just wanted to see her happy. But now, I see the light. I don't want to divorce you. Let's leave right now and live happily. It's not too late, right?
I was utterly dumbfounded by his words. How on earth could he come up with such a delusional fantasy in his head?
You know, I've always thought this, but you really need to stop with the whole mommy thing. It's super creepy. I get that you want to please her, but trying to get rid of your wife and using the insurance money to buy her fancy stuff? No way I'm staying with someone like that. Just the thought gives me a headache.
Brian looked utterly defeated by my words.
In any case, I will definitely be seeking a divorce. Plus, I will also ask for reimbursement for all the designer items you bought with my money. What? But then I won't be able to buy designer items.
Even after all this, she still seems obsessed with designer brands. I'm truly dumbfounded by this mother and son duo.
Enough is enough.
Suddenly, my father-in-law interjected.
All you care about is yourselves. Do you realize how terrified Karen has been because of your actions? Are designer items really worth it to you, even if it means using someone else's money? Do you realize how much trouble you've caused her?
The two of them were taken aback by his outburst. Thanks to him speaking up for me, I felt a bit relieved. But my revenge wasn't over yet.
Wait a sec. When did you find out about this? On the first night of our honeymoon in Italy. I overheard you talking to your mom in the middle of the night. So, that's why you flew back to New York the next morning. You didn't tell my company about this, did you? You're finally catching on? Well, you'll know the answer to that soon enough.
Just as I said that, Brian's phone started ringing at the perfect timing.
It's from the company. You gotta be kidding me.
Hesitantly, Brian answered.
Hello? What? Fired? No, wait. It's all a misunderstanding.
Before he could explain, the call seemed to have been cut off.
Just so you know, I've already provided evidence of this to your company.
Having lost both his wife and job, Brian seemed drained of energy and slumped to the floor.
So, from now on, let's communicate through my lawyer. And stay out of my life, okay?
And just like that, our newlywed life came to an end. The story didn't stop with the divorce. My lawyer, whom I'd been consulting with, told me that even just plotting to kill someone was a crime, so I reported the matter to the police. While they weren't arrested, both of them had to pay a hefty fine. Thanks to having a criminal record, Brian struggled to find a new job, and Karen became the talk of the town. Moreover, to pay for the damages and alimony, almost all of the designer goods Karen had hoarded were sold off. The only thing left was a purse, a birthday gift from her husband. From now on, the household finances will be managed by her husband, and Karen's pocket money would be reduced. Seems like they got a taste of their own medicine. As for me, I'm living alone in a condo in Manhattan. While I did divorce shortly after getting married, I didn't feel lonely at all. Rather, I felt liberated. If possible, I'd never want to live with someone else again. Sure, living alone has its challenges, but not having to constantly be wary of someone else is more than worth it. And no more dealing with Karen's money grubbing. I've started saving bit by bit, hoping that someday, I'd find happiness with someone else. I'm not exactly pretty-faced, and to be blunt, I'm overweight. Yet, despite this, a man married me, a man I genuinely loved. Now that I'm pregnant, he told me, I hate poor people like you. I'm gonna divorce you, a fat and ugly woman like you. Raise the child in your belly on your own. I can't believe he said such hurtful things to me. I wonder how he could say that to me. My name is Catherine. Growing up, I was never the center of attention, always in the quieter groups. To be honest, I've always been on the heavier side, and I'm well aware I don't have a traditionally cute face. So, I never really had admirers. But, surprisingly, I was quite athletic in school and was one of the top performers during PE. The female gym teacher would often compliment me, saying,
Catherine, you're so flexible and healthy. Your skin even glows more than anyone else's.
I suppose being top-notch in PE was the only area where I could shine. And having a gym teacher notice that made me incredibly happy. After high school, I chose to attend a beauty and health vocational school. I genuinely enjoyed learning about makeup techniques, body mechanics, and how to maintain good posture. I was among the top students. And I felt this was my calling. Eventually, I found a job at a spa that offered massages. It wasn't a big company, and the pay wasn't great. But I felt a sense of purpose, and many clients requested me. The spa wasn't exclusively for women, men could also get oil massages and relaxation massages. One of the male clients was Bob. Bob once said, after one of my massages,
"You're really good. I don't think I can get a massage from anyone but you."
He praised me a lot. He even advised,
"Why not spread your skills more? You're that good."
It felt great to be complimented on something I'm confident in, so I naturally developed feelings for him. I mean, anyone can do what I do. But yeah, I trained all the staff here. I replied modestly, but deep down, I was falling for Bob. Perhaps he sensed my feelings. Because he eventually asked me out. Bob knew many trendy places, and he was fun to talk to. Being with him always lifted my spirits, and I started thinking of marriage. And maybe he sensed that too. Because he proposed, and we got married. It felt like the peak of my life. I mean, I never stood out in school, wasn't particularly pretty, and was overweight. Because of that, I never experienced being popular or sought after. Yet, I was able to marry such a wonderful man. We rented a small apartment and began our life as a married couple. I imagined a future filled with endless smiles and happiness. I would even daydream to that extent. But those hopes were too idealistic. The times of such joyful smiles didn't last very long. My sister became the source of trouble in our marriage. Yes, I have an older sister named Rachel. Rachel was the opposite of me, pretty and with a great figure. She was always popular with the boys in school, and she's dated so many that I doubt she can even keep track. But to be honest, I never really liked Rachel. She always looked down on me because of our contrasting appearances.
"Catherine, look at this dress. Isn't it cute? You should try wearing something like this." "Oh, but I doubt it'd fit you. The dress would probably feel so sorry,"
she teased, laughing. Another time, she said, "Oh my, someone confessed their feelings to me again, even though I told them I have a boyfriend. I must be super attractive. Catherine, you're lucky, you probably don't have such problems, right?" She would often make these annoying remarks. But I couldn't retort because Rachel wasn't wrong. I'd always hoped to avoid her as much as possible since she was always like this. But suddenly, Rachel started visiting the apartment where Bob and I lived. It was right around the time when I found out I was pregnant. Unexpectedly, Rachel said with sincerity,
"Catherine, you're pregnant? Congratulations."
Hearing that, I was a bit shocked. Maybe her perspective changed since I got married. My feelings of surprise turned to joy. However, I felt a bit off shortly after. After looking around our place, she asked, "Is Bob not home today?" I thoughtlessly told her he was at work, but she kept talking about him. "So, what's Bob like? Does he get weekends off? Where do you guys usually go for dates?" I was bombarded with questions. I felt she spent more time talking about that than my pregnancy. It started to bring back all the negative feelings I had about her, but she just asked her questions and then left. The short interaction left me feeling drained. But after that, almost every weekend, Rachel started coming over. Bob was home on weekends, and initially, Rachel was all smiles and greeted him.
Bob, you're gonna be a dad soon. Congratulations.
But, as her visits became frequent, she began to focus her attention solely on Bob, barely acknowledging me. Moreover, she started showing up in stylish clothes she usually wouldn't wear. I've never been much of a catch, but after all, I'm still a woman. I could see through Rachel's intentions. She was definitely coming to see Bob. It was evident from the way her voice and expressions became more feminine around him. Despite my growing discomfort, the bond between them seemed to be strengthening. I had always believed that Bob wouldn't fall for someone like Rachel, especially now that he's my husband. But as time passed, I began to feel an unsettling atmosphere, like my trust in him was being eroded. While Rachel and Bob's relationship appeared to grow closer, Bob's attitude towards me seemed to be cooling. Usually, when he'd come home from work, he'd say with a bright voice,
I'm home. I've had a long day and can't wait to eat your cooking.
And during dinner, he'd praise,
This is so delicious. I'm so lucky to eat your cooking every day.
However, a few weeks after Rachel started visiting, those kind words vanished. Instead of his usual demeanor, when Bob came home from work, he'd sigh and grumble.
Man, today was exhausting. Why on earth does the boss talk so darn long?
And during dinner, he started to complain.
I really wanted to eat some meat today. This isn't filling at all.
I felt increasingly lonely and finally confronted Bob.
Hey!
Have you been irritated lately? Why does every day seem so miserable to you? To my surprise, Bob shot me an angry glare. Something I hadn't seen even when we were dating.
What? I don't want to hear that from you. You don't understand anything. After all, you just work some slow-paced job and earn peanuts.
His words felt harsh, almost like verbal abuse. I was deeply hurt, on the verge of tears. I never wanted to fight, but I couldn't stay silent either. I don't work slowly, and my salary isn't that low. Before I could say more, Bob cut me off.
That's enough. I'm gonna take a bath and then hit the hay.
And with that, he headed straight to the bathroom. From then on, Bob often came home late and was constantly on his phone when he was home. I had a growing sense of unease. Especially since I was nearly 7 months pregnant. I didn't want to think negatively, but there were things I couldn't help but wonder about. One day, I gently prodded.
Rachel hasn't been around lately, has she?
Indeed. Rachel, who used to visit almost weekly, had suddenly stopped coming. However, Bob nonchalantly replied, Who knows? Rachel lives in the next town over. If we wanted to see her, we could any time. This response alarmed me. I had never mentioned that Rachel lived in the neighboring town. Moreover, Rachel had just moved there barely a month ago. By that time, she had already stopped coming to our apartment. Unable to contain my suspicions any longer, I blurted out.
How do you know Rachel lives in the next town? Are you hiding something with her? It sure seems like it.
I finally blurted it out clearly. It was clear how much Bob meant to me, which is why I expressed myself so emotionally. I expressed my feelings so strongly just because I wanted to convey how I felt. But Bob seemed indifferent. Instead, he smirked and said, all right, I get it. If you're gonna be this way, we should just break up. Honestly, I'm not into women who've put on weight like you. And with your low earnings, life ain't fun. I don't like being poor. Divorce might be our only option. I was overwhelmed with shock, anger, and sadness. Especially with our baby on the way.
That's so cruel. What about our child?
In rapid succession, he retorted.
Raise the kid by yourself. I'm not gonna be that child's father anymore. Look, I like beautiful women with great figures like Rachel. I've decided to marry Rachel once I divorce you. So, you're useless to me now. I married you because you were good at massages and seemed like you'd handle the housework, but I'm over it.
He was just going off. I couldn't even get a word in. But being told such blunt truths made me change my feelings instantly. There's no point being with this man anymore. Actually, I realized I didn't want to be. Surely, Bob and Rachel had something going on. With my feelings completely cooled, I told him,
"All right, let's break up then. Take care."
Then, I handed him the business card of the divorce attorney I had prepared, foreseeing this situation.
Wow, you're quick. I can divorce you right away with this. Once it's finalized, I might just head over to Rachel's place. You can keep living your broke life.
Bob was all excited as he took the business card, but if he truly planned on marrying Rachel, that excitement would probably fade pretty quickly, wouldn't it? But he didn't seem to realize that yet. So, I immediately started preparing to move out. I quickly secured a new place and decided to live there for a while. My belly was starting to show, and I was thinking of taking a break from work. About a month after I left our home, my phone rang one day. It was Bob. Even if I didn't answer, I knew what he wanted. Still, I picked up to settle things. His voice was frantic.
Hey, where are you? Do something, come on.
I calmly responded. I'm in one of the new luxury condos. It's spacious, has a great view, it's perfect. There was a pause from Bob.
What? How can someone broke like you afford such a place?
He'd probably think that way, wouldn't he? After all, he just assumed I was broke without knowing the whole story. But to be clear. Why? Because I have around $700,000 in savings. And my monthly income is around $50,000. He probably wouldn't believe it, but it was true. What I mean is, sure, the income from treatments at that workplace alone might not have been that much. However, the truth is, I was actually allowed to have a side job within that workplace. I taught remote massage classes online. At the workplace, I became an instructor, teaching beauty and health courses, including massage techniques. Initially, the spa owner appreciated my skills and knowledge, suggesting I try it. The staff at the same workplace also acknowledged that they improved faster thanks to my teachings. However, in the beginning, there wasn't much in terms of results. It was probably like that when I first started dating Bob too. Things changed, and now I have about 2,000 students nationwide. With a $50 membership fee, I made $100,000 monthly. I got half of it, so my share was really $50,000. When I told Bob this, he shouted,
"Why didn't you tell me sooner? We wouldn't have divorced. And we could have lived in a better house."
Too little, too late. He had always seen me as just a housemaid good for chores and massages. He'd always assumed I didn't earn much. Regarding the house choice with Bob, I told him, I was matching your income level. After all, we agreed to split living expenses. So, if you're calling that a poor lifestyle, doesn't that mean your income isn't that great to begin with? I made sure to say it plainly. And, to twist the knife further, I added sarcastically, "But, are you happy now that you married Rachel? I heard, you two really did get hitched. Congratulations." The reason this stings is because he must be facing hefty financial demands.
What the hell? I'm not happy at all. And what's this alimony about?
Indeed, I had consulted with a private investigator about Bob even before our divorce. So, after our divorce, I received evidence of him cheating with Rachel. So, I tried claiming compensation for emotional distress. But the tragedy doesn't end there for Bob. Turns out, Rachel had a significant debt, and she was making Bob pay for it. Rachel always attracted a lot of attention, and she was notorious for her affairs. Furthermore, Rachel had previously been through a divorce. The reason for their separation was Rachel's infidelity. Consequently, she had been charged with child support and property division due to that divorce. To cover these payments, Rachel had already accumulated a significant amount of debt. I was, of course, aware of this. Now, the situation is a reflection of Bob's decision to marry such a woman. Moreover, I'll also be claiming child support for the baby I'm carrying. So, with our divorce, Bob now faces a slew of hefty payments and has started a life burdened with debt. When I explained all this, Bob exclaimed,
Hey, the baby in your belly is mine, right? A child needs a father. Right, Catherine?
But who was the one who cruelly called me ugly and fat? Now, it's too late for such remarks, and there's no way I'm going to accommodate him. If you need money, why not spread your skills to everyone? You told me, remember? That everyone would benefit from Catherine's expertise. I took that advice and look where I am now. You should do the same. I suggested. It's pretty ironic, really. Because even though he was the one who suggested it, I was the one who acted on his advice, earning a high income. He neglected to notice my growing income and rashly labeled me as poor and then discarded me. Now, he's the one leading a life of poverty. Nowadays, Rachel keeps telling him,
What's wrong with you? I thought you were a capable man, but you're nothing but common folk. Work harder and earn more money. You're just a man to repay my debts.
Come to think of it, when Rachel asked about Bob in the past, I thought it would be best to speak slightly favorably of him, so maybe I embellished the truth a bit. But all things considered, since both have similar life stories and ended up together, maybe they should just figure things out together. That's what I conveyed before ending the call. Nowadays, Bob is working day and night, juggling his main job and side jobs, trying to repay the massive debt he's incurred. All while Rachel, his wife, doesn't seem to be working earnestly at all. It's a living nightmare. Well, can't be helped. Bob not only abandoned me, but also the child in my womb. It's only fitting as a punishment. On the other hand, a couple of months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. While he's been dealt the card of not having a father, my parents and my workplace's owner have been supportive, and the child is growing up well. The initial months of raising a child meant I couldn't engage in any work-related activities, but fortunately, I had savings. Unexpectedly, even after my temporary retirement, my archived instructional videos kept generating steady income. Thanks to that, my child and I are leading a comfortable life.
How could this happen in just 5 days?
I screamed as I looked around the living room of my house. I had been admitted to the hospital to give birth, and in the 5 days until my discharge. The living room had become filled with the smell of rotting food. Unfinished frozen food was left on the desk, with the remnants of the leftovers. Scattered across the floor were plastic containers and trays, probably leftovers from some ready-made meals. Surrounding them, I could see lots of what appeared to be flies.
Cleaning and tidying up is your job, right?
So I just left everything as is until you got back. My husband, waving his hand irritably at the small insects flying around the light. He turned around and frowned upon seeing me, covering my nose from the stench. See, it's impossible to live in such a stinky room, isn't it? Hurry up and clean it. I was at a loss for words. Could my husband not see the baby in my arms? My name is Madison, a 28-year-old office worker. I've been working at the company I joined right after graduation, blessed with respectable supervisors and colleagues, and everything's been going well. A few years ago, I married Ethan, who I met at the same company, is 2 years older than me. After we got married, I continued working, and Ethan and I were good colleagues at the company, and after work, we were great partners, supporting and encouraging each other through our troubles. When we were about a year into our marriage, I found out I was pregnant. We were delighted since we wanted a child. Our parents and in-laws cried tears of joy when we told them. My in-laws have been kind to me since Ethan and I started dating. When I first went to their house to greet them before we got married, they welcomed me with open arms. After getting married, since our homes are close, Ethan's mother and I often go out on weekends, and we've built a good relationship. When I told Ethan, "Your parents are truly considerate and wonderful," he nodded and said, "Mom's been an amazing mother who's looked after me." Dad worked from dawn till dusk and wasn't home much, but he always showered us with love and gratitude towards Mom, which made me realize once again what a caring couple they are. After we got married, My mother-in-law would often express concern, saying, "Values have changed over the years, and as long as you and Ethan are happy with your lives, that's all that matters. But I worry that you, Madison, will be burdened with all the housework now that you're married and working." I reassured her with a smile, saying, "No need to worry. Ethan and I are splitting the chores well and helping each other out," and she seemed relieved. Actually, Ethan and I began living together after we got married. My mother-in-law knew this and was probably concerned about whether we could live together without any discontent. Of course, there were some worries about getting married without having lived together first. But Ethan was always kind to me during our dating period, never forgetting to be considerate even after many years. So I was confident that we could live together without any problems. True to my expectations, Ethan had been sticking to the promises we made since we started living together, and he never pushed all the responsibilities onto me. He even said he wanted to lessen my burdens more. Such a caring husband, after finding out about my pregnancy, told me to rely on him more when we were together since something might happen to our precious child. Despite his busy schedule, Ethan managed to take care of the household. In the early stages of my pregnancy, I suffered from morning sickness and often had to take time off work. I used to blame myself, having always managed to balance work and everything else before. Even when I saw Ethan going to work every day and felt that I should at least do some housework, I couldn't because I was feeling ill. When I cried and apologized to Ethan, saying, "I'm sorry, I couldn't do anything today," he'd reassure me, "Hey, no need to apologize. I've lived alone for a long time, so household chores are no big deal. Madison, you're doing your best to nurture our baby in your belly. I can't completely understand your hardship, so let me at least take care of our home." Lately, Ethan has been very studious, buying parenting books and diligently studying every day. Seeing him like this made me realize again how glad I am to have married him. My pregnancy went smoothly, and I spent it without any worries until the birth. My parents and in-laws would come by from time to check on us, and thanks to the support of those around us, the baby grew well in my belly. As the due date approached and my belly grew, I took maternity leave and now focus on staying healthy and calm. It's tough to go out with my belly so big, but I managed to make it to my prenatal checkups while taking care of myself. Recently, as I've entered the final month, my mother-in-law, who lives nearby, started accompanying me to the checkups because she's worried about me. She helps carry my backpack and other items, and while I feel a bit guilty, I'm also very grateful. At first, I felt guilty for having her come all the way with me and declined when my mother-in-law offered to accompany me. But she cheerfully said, "Now that my children are grown up, I have quite a bit of free time. Besides, attending your checkups is pretty much all I have to do. I'm certainly concerned about your health, but it also doubles as exercise for me, so it's a win-win situation." So, I began to rely on her and together we headed for the checkup that day. Then, one day, while I was getting my usual checkup at the hospital, I was suddenly struck by a pain in my stomach. The doctor, noticing something was wrong with me, calmly said while trying to reassure me, "I'll perform an internal examination right away." While I was nervously waiting for the results, the doctor said, "You're showing signs of labor, so you'll be admitted right away. We'll prepare for the delivery while monitoring you closely. You're going to meet your baby soon," he told me gently. However, it was also sudden that I was not mentally prepared. In the midst of this, my mother-in-law held my hand and reassured me, "It's going to be all right. I'll be right here with you, so don't worry." I reminded myself that I had to stay calm for my baby, and gradually I came to accept the situation and prepared myself for the imminent birth. I had calmed down a bit when my mother-in-law said, "I'm going to run home real quick to grab what you need. I'll be right back. I'll also give Ethan a call," and she dashed out of the hospital. A few minutes later, my mother-in-law came back and immediately asked me, "Are you okay? Are you in any pain or discomfort?" "Thank you so much. You've been a great help." She held my hand and said with a smile, "It's nothing. Just let me do this much. Ethan might be able to get off work early. He could still make it in time for the birth. I've already called your parents just in case." Her words reminded me that I had completely forgotten to inform my parents about the labor pain and my anxiety about giving birth. My parents, living in the next town over, which I'll equate to living in the next state over, might not make it before the birth, but they said they would come right away. Soon after, my father-in-law arrived, simply saying, "Oh, it's time," and watched over me from the corridor. Then, a while later, my parents arrived. While enduring the repeated labor pains, I waited for the moment to come. My parents deeply thanked my in-laws. "Thank you so much for everything, from getting things ready for the hospital stay to being by our daughter's side." And to me, they said, "It'll be over soon, take some deep breaths. We're all here with you, you'll be okay." My in-laws replied with a smile to my parents, "Oh, no worries at all. We're just glad we made it in time," and the whole family, except for my husband, surrounded me. I was growing more anxious as the intervals between the pains shortened, but having my whole family there was a great comfort. Several hours later, even though it was late into the night, I gave birth to a healthy baby. While waiting in the lounge near the nurse's station, trying not to disturb the other pregnant women and mothers, my in-laws and parents expressed their joy through silent hugs and high fives. Having finally given birth, I was overwhelmed with relief and moved by the sight of my newborn, though I felt a pang of disappointment that my husband was not by my side. He was supposed to have left work early, and I wondered why he hadn't come, but by the next morning, he still hadn't appeared. My in-laws called my husband numerous times, worrying that something had happened, but they couldn't reach him. Even at 9 a.m., my father-in-law went to our house. But my husband did not answer. Finally, when my mother-in-law contacted my husband's office, they were aware that I had been admitted for childbirth and said my husband had left work earlier than usual. It was supposed to be a day dedicated just to me, so he took the day off, and it seems like he didn't show up at the office. After that, the whole family was in a frenzy. If I'm not at home or the office, we thought maybe it was best to go to the police, and it was starting to turn into a big deal. However, just as it was about to be noon, the receptionist informed us that my husband had arrived. Relief was short-lived, and I couldn't help but feel anxious, wondering what on earth had happened. But as I was about to speak to my husband, who had come to the hospital room, I was at a loss for words. "Ah, so it's born." It was all he said at first. His suit was disheveled, and his hair was a mess. As he got closer, I could even smell alcohol on him. I couldn't believe he might have gone drinking at a time like this, and when I looked at him, he showed no interest in our baby, instead staring intently at his smartphone. Trying to remain calm, I asked, "What have you been doing up until now?" Ethan, still half asleep, responded, "Sorry. I just went for a drink. It was an old friend I haven't seen in a while, and I couldn't say no. I've just been sleeping until now and got here late." He didn't take his eyes off his phone during this time, so my anger finally exploded. But before that, my father-in-law grabbed my husband's shoulders.
"What are you thinking? It doesn't matter if it's been a while or whatever. Meeting friends for drinks doesn't even compare to your wife giving birth. Why didn't you turn them down?"
My husband kept interrupting with "but." And it's just that. Eventually, he stopped talking altogether with a sullen face under the fiery glare of my father-in-law. After a heavy sigh, he left the hospital room without another glance at me or our baby. My father and father-in-law tried to follow him, but they couldn't keep up due to their age, and my husband never showed his face at the hospital during my stay. 5 days after giving birth, with the support of my family, both mother and child were healthy and we were discharged without any issues. As my mother and father, who had come from far away, were leaving, my mother-in-law said to them, "We're looking forward to seeing you again. Please leave your daughter to us," and on the day of discharge, she helped me get home with my father-in-law carrying the luggage. That morning, after being discharged, I texted my husband just to say I was going home, and he immediately called back. When I answered, he said, "Hey, Madison. I'm glad you're discharged safely. I'm gonna pick you up and we'll head home by car." I hadn't expected a call back from my husband and secretly hoped he might have reflected a bit. When I told my mother-in-law that my husband had called, she laughed and joked, Well, if Ethan isn't busy, maybe he could come pick us up. I told my husband, I was planning on having your parents send me, but I appreciate you coming to get me, and he said, got it. I'll have mom and dad head back right now. After informing them that my husband was coming to pick me up, my in-laws seemed relieved and went on their way. I thanked the hospital staff repeatedly and finished the paperwork before getting into my husband's car. He didn't apologize for before but seemed to be in high spirits as he drove. Soon we were home, and I felt like crying from the pain, even from such a short ride. Thinking about all the mothers in the world enduring this pain and persevering through parenting made me feel a little anxious. With my husband's previous enthusiasm for parenting, I had to psych myself up, believing it'll be all right. I chalked up the troubles during my hospital stay to him being tired or perhaps getting scolded by his dad more than he expected and sulking about it. I braced myself with the resolve that we would raise our baby together and opened the front door. Instantly, an appalling stench hit my nose. Hesitating to enter because of the unknown smell, my husband seemed unbothered and flung the living room door wide open. Immediately, the rotten odor of garbage overwhelmed me, making me feel nauseous. Wow, that reeks. Hey, clean this up, will you? He commanded authoritatively, a satisfied smirk on his face. I waited the 5 days you were in the hospital, so clean this up now. Can't live in a house that smells like this. Holding our baby, I nearly collapsed on the spot but managed to restrain myself. How can you live like this, to let the house get so dirty? I asked, barely containing my anger, to which he nonchalantly replied that it just happened with eating and sleeping. Food left out. Washing, laundry, and trash are left everywhere. The house was in a deplorable state, unrecognizable as our home. Seeing the mess, I couldn't help but blurt out, "Stop joking around. You never showed up at the hospital, and you neglected all the housework. Before the birth, you used to help clean enthusiastically. Why have you suddenly stopped doing anything?" He responded incredulously, "Why should I be scolded? You love working, Madison. You worked hard even after we got married and until you took maternity leave. Housework is a wife's job, isn't it? I thought you'd be happy to have something to do when you got back, so I left it for you. Clean it up now that you're discharged." He had grown accustomed to the mess, nonchalantly relaxing on the couch in the fly-infested living room. It was impossible to live in such filth, let alone lay a clean towel down for the baby to sleep on. Attempting to clean while holding the baby was futile, so I yelled at my husband, who was scrolling on his phone.
Do you really think I can clean up in this state? If you're not going to do it, hold our baby at the entrance. It's impossible to care for our baby in this mess.
He sighed in exasperation. Why do I have to take care of it? Housework and parenting are your job. You're supposed to do these things, right? And since when did you start ordering me around so much? This is why women are no good. Still acting like you're pregnant even though there's no baby inside anymore. You're the worst, trying to make excuses and boss your husband around. I reached my breaking point.
Enough! What's gotten into you? Why are you acting this way? What happened to you while I was in the hospital?
Tears streamed down my face as I confronted him, and he groaned, avoiding my gaze. Then, as if psyching himself up with a slap to his cheeks, he stood up with determination.
I've been too lenient with my wife, turning her into a useless woman, but not anymore. I've decided to properly educate my wife as a husband should. He declared, his face contorted with effort. I've done my part. I went to pick you and the baby up from the hospital to ensure I wasn't completely detached from parenting. I've made it clear that housework and parenting are your responsibilities. I'm becoming a responsible husband.
Speechless at his transformation, I stood there as he announced, I have plans to go out drinking with a buddy. Make sure the house is clean before I get back. Don't expect any help from me, and with that, he left. All I could do was stand there, unable to process the drastic change from the kind man I once knew. What could possibly have happened to turn the man who was once eager to share household duties and learn to be a good father into this? In my panicked state, the sight of the garbage-filled room pushed me over the edge, and tears began to fall, landing on my baby's cheeks. The baby, awakened by my crying, began to fuss, and I started crying out loud as well.
Mom, I just don't understand anymore.
Help me. I pleaded as I sat in the entranceway and called my mother on my phone. As soon as the connection was made, I cried out, and my mother said, "I'll be right there," while my father drove her to me. She told me to wait outside rather than stay in the dirty house. Sitting on the front porch with my baby, I continued to cry quietly under the bright sunshine. When my parents arrived, my in-laws were with them. Upon seeing me, my mother-in-law immediately began to apologize profusely. My parents intervened to stop her, assuring that it was Ethan who was to blame. Once that was settled, I finally had a moment to ask why my in-laws were there in the first place. Tears welling up in her eyes, my mother-in-law confessed, "The truth is, we also doubted Ethan and feared he might be troubling you. So, we decided to secretly visit your house. That's when we bumped into your parents and they kindly gave us a ride here. I'm truly sorry for all the trouble our son has caused." I had to somehow stop the conversation from turning into another round of apologies. My father-in-law, who was so angry he looked like he might start yelling at any moment, didn't utter a single word. But the way his temples throbbed red and twitched told me he was on the verge of an outburst. Neither my mother-in-law nor my father-in-law could get through to Ethan on the phone. That darned son of mine. Next time I see him, I'm gonna give him a piece of my mind, my father-in-law muttered, then took several deep breaths to calm down. After a while, he seemed more at peace and kindly said to me, "Now, you shouldn't be stressing yourself. Please, ride in my car. We'll handle the cleaning, just wait for us." With that, he and my mother-in-law took my child and me to the car and then entered the house. My parents followed suit, insisting on helping, and I could hear all four of their screams. No doubt they had opened the door to that bug-infested, foul-smelling living room. I hugged my baby tightly in the car, feeling terrible about the situation. Hours passed as my father-in-law went out to buy insecticide, and bags packed to the brim with trash were taken out to the collection area. Thanks to their efforts, when I entered the house again, there were no bugs, ventilation had been done, and the smell was much less offensive. It appeared they had cleaned every room, not just the living room. I felt a profound gratitude as my mother and mother-in-law prepared dinner. It had been a long time since I had someone else's home cooking. Having managed my diet strictly during pregnancy, it tasted even more delicious, and I polished it off in no time. The home-cooked meal helped ease my anger towards Ethan for a while. As we were waiting for Ethan's return, someone knocked at the door. Just as I rushed to see, my father-in-law reassured me, "You take it easy," and went to answer it. He answered and exclaiming, "Ethan?" I knew from my father-in-law calling my husband's name that Ethan had come home. I wondered why he would knock the door. While quietly trying not to wake the sleeping child, we all went to see. To my surprise, a man was dragging Ethan into the house. Ethan's face was red and swollen, and he was sobbing loudly. Upon seeing me, the man introduced himself, "Nice to meet you. I'm Michael, a friend of Ethan's. We went out for drinks, and that's when I heard about you and the baby. I had no idea, and I am terribly sorry for causing such distress during this challenging time." I was surprised, but had the man raise his head to see my husband still sobbing. Noticing my gaze, a man Michael said, "This guy was boasting about defeating his lousy wife in argument, so I asked for the details. Turns out, what he did was so terrible, and even though I told him to go home, he wouldn't listen and didn't understand what he'd done wrong, so I ended up hitting him. I'm sorry." Since the mood for drinking was gone, it seemed they had disbanded, but he couldn't leave my weeping husband behind and brought him home. As I was apologizing for the inconvenience, suddenly my husband raised his face and started yelling.
"Just because you were out-argued, you resort to violence. That's why you can't get married. You're single because you don't understand that household chores and parenting are a wife's job. It's the worst to be punched out of nowhere by someone who's just an onlooker."
Look, I'm sorry for hitting you. I apologize for that.
But seriously, what's going on with you? Last time we met, you were fine, right? Why are you suddenly saying stuff like a deadbeat husband?
Michael said, clearly baffled. Feeling the same, I realized my husband's attitude had indeed changed abruptly.
Ethan, you never said such things before I was hospitalized for childbirth. You said household chores and parenting are a wife's duty, and that the husband should come first. Why did you suddenly start thinking that way?
When I asked again, my husband blurted out, household chores and parenting are a woman's job. That's what everyone says. I realized that I was wrong all along.
Who's everyone? Your coworkers? Friends? Who exactly are you talking about? I asked him straight in the face, to which he replied shortly, people on the social media. What? You're taking information from the internet at face value? Are you out of your mind?
Michael said, raising an eyebrow in disbelief. My husband, looking annoyed, thrust his smartphone at him. Look at this. It's obvious women should do household chores because they don't earn as much as men. Only women can have babies, so parenting is their job too. See, everyone agrees with this. Michael screamed in disbelief after looking at the screen. You believe this website? Are you insane? Taking the smartphone from Michael, I saw a website. It was belittling housewives, filled with countless stories praising the shoving of household and parenting duties onto wives. These opinions my husband referred to as everyone's were posted on an internet forum. Summarizing my still shouting husband's story, it seems he came across such sites right before I was hospitalized, and began to think that he was just pampering his wife, being a useless husband. While alone at home during my hospital stay, he kept visiting these sites, convinced that he had been wrong. He commented about changing himself on these sites and became hooked on the supportive comments he received. As a result, my husband was dyed with the belief that household chores and parenting are women's work because women are less capable at work and earn less money. If they have a complaint, they should just earn more. Unlike me, speechless with astonishment, both our parents and in-laws were furious. It's unthinkable. We didn't raise you to be like this, they said in unison. Michael, whom my husband looked to for salvation, said coldly, I'm disappointed. I can't be friends with someone like this. As of today, I'm cutting ties with you. I joined in, confronting my husband. First off, why should I prioritize the opinions of faceless strangers online over us? Are the people writing more trustworthy to you than we are? That made my husband look at me as if he had an epiphany. To top it off, my mother said sharply, with a cold look, it seems none of the important people here, your dear Madison, your parents, your friends, share those values. If you still think you're right, then I guess we'll have to leave you, because your thinking is different from Ethan's. My father also said, as things stand, I can't leave my precious daughter Madison with you any longer. Madison, it's not too late. We're ready to welcome you, and it's okay to rely on us if it's tough. Just then, as if a spell had been lifted, my husband, who had been raging just a moment before, suddenly calmed down.
No, but...
he kept repeating. When he looked up and saw my face clearly, his own turned pale as a ghost.
For me, the most important thing is Madison. I wanted to be a good husband for her, sought out loads of info, and then
With tears in his eyes, he prostrated himself before me with a burst of emotion. I'm so sorry, Madison. I was wrong. Seeing him like this, my father-in-law spoke in a calm voice. I have a question for you. When you were a kid, did you ever see me tell your mother that housework and parenting were a woman's job, or show that attitude? Did I appear that way to you as a father? He asked with tears in his eyes. My husband replied, Dad, you were always a wonderful father, fully supporting Mom by her side. Then he continued, I realized that I was too bound by what I read online, and I couldn't see what was around me. I'm truly sorry. Witnessing his sudden apologies, my parents said, Madison, it's up to you what to do next. We'll support you whatever you decide. After some thought, I told my husband there won't be another chance, and I decided to forgive him this time. Since then, My husband has woken up from the spell of extreme online opinions and is struggling with unfamiliar housework and parenting as he engages with our baby. I wonder how long this will last, but my in-laws and my own parents seem to share my feelings, as they continue to train him while he still strives on. He now says with concern, "Kids are adorable, but parenting is more physically demanding than I imagined. I now realize you've been doing all the housework and looking after the child alone while I'm at work. Thanks so much. If you're not feeling well, don't hesitate to rely on me." Looking at the smiling face of my husband holding our child, I think he might truly become a good father. I'm hoping these peaceful days will last forever.